Tonight, I have 3 road trip horror stories for you about road rage incidents based on real events. These are the true accounts of a college student, a delivery driver, and a regular guy who picked the wrong road. First up, a student trying to get home for the holidays is targeted by an old station wagon that hijacks her car radio to torment her before the attack begins. Next, a delivery driver having a rough shift runs into a raging driver who stops yelling, goes completely silent, and decides to run him over instead of fighting. And finally, a man takes a shortcut on a dark back road and gets followed all the way to his own front lawn by a silent figure wearing a porcelain white mask. These true road trip horror stories and road rage incidents prove that on the open road, the only thing separating you from a monster is a thin sheet of glass. So lock your doors and subscribe, so you know what's coming for you next. Driving for 8 hours straight does things to a person's head. You get into a rhythm, watching the white lines tick by, listening to the tires singing against the pavement. Ren was 20 years old, pushing hard to get home for the holidays, but her gas tank wasn't going to make it. It was Christmas Eve, dark by 8 o'clock, and a dry snow was starting to stick to the windshield. She was still 2 hours out from her parents' place when the fuel light finally bullied her into pulling over. She took the exit for a small, beat-up gas station, sitting alone in the middle of the pines. Ren pulled up to the pump. She killed the engine and stepped out. It was quiet out there. Real quiet. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and the smell of wet pine needles mixed with old gasoline. She swiped her card and started fueling, listening to the glug-glug of the gas going into the tank. That's when the other car showed up. It rolled in slow, crunching over the gravel. An old station wagon. Brown, boxy, looking like something straight out of 1985. It didn't pull up to a pump on the other side. It pulled right up behind her and stopped. Headlights stayed on, bright beams cutting through the dark, shining right past her legs. Ren looked over, expecting the driver to hop out, maybe ask for directions or start pumping gas. But nobody moved. The windows on that wagon were tinted pitch black. You couldn't see a thing inside, just dark glass and those blinding headlights. She stood there, feeling exposed. Her boots shuffled on the wet concrete. She just wanted the tank to fill so she could get back on the road. Then she heard it. Music. It was coming from inside her own car. Ren frowned. She had been listening to a true crime podcast on her phone, and she knew for a fact she had paused it. Her car radio was off. The dashboard was dark, but clear as day, she could hear a song playing through her speakers. It was an old Christmas song, one of those cheesy, choir-heavy tunes from the 60s. It sounded scratchy, tinny, like it was coming from a radio station that was barely tuning in. She leaned in through her open window. The console was dead. No lights, no clock, nothing. But the music was loud. It wasn't static. It was a clear melody, bouncing along like everything was fine. But out there, alone in the dark with a strange car idling behind her, it didn't feel fine. It felt wrong. Ren looked back at the wagon. It was just sitting there. The engine was running, a low, rough idle that she could feel in the soles of her shoes. The driver was watching her. She knew it. She couldn't see them, but she could feel eyes on her back. She didn't wait for the tank to click full. Ren yanked the nozzle out, splashing a little gas on the ground, and screwed the cap back on tight. She jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. That clunk of the locks going down was the best sound she'd heard all night. She tore out of that lot, tires spinning a little on the slush, and got back on the highway. She checked the rearview mirror. The station wagon was still there. sitting by the pumps, red taillights glowing in the mist. 30 minutes went by. Ren tried to calm her nerves. She told herself it was just a glitch. Maybe a crossed wire in the dashboard or some weird Bluetooth interference. Cars do strange things when they get old. She turned her podcast back on, let the voices fill the cab, and tried to focus on the road. The highway was empty. No other cars, just the blacktop and the snow. She started to relax. Then the music came back. No warning, no static, just that same scratchy, happy Christmas music blasting out of her speakers at full volume. It cut right over the podcast. Ren's gut tightened. She hammered the power button on the radio. Nothing. She twisted the volume knob all the way down. The music stayed loud. It was like the car was possessed. She gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and then light exploded in her rearview mirror. The wagon was back. It didn't come up slow. It appeared out of nowhere, right on her bumper. 1 second, the road behind her was dark. The next, her mirror was nothing but blinding white light. Ren punched the gas. She pushed the car up to 70, then 80. The wagon matched her. It stayed locked on her tail, inches away. If she tapped the brakes, they would have crashed. It was aggressive, nasty. The music was screaming in the car, the lights were blinding her. She couldn't see anything but the glare. It felt like the driver of that wagon was right in the back seat with her. Suddenly, the wagon jerked to the right. It took the next exit ramp at high speed, tires screeching, and vanished into the trees. Ren was shaking now. Her hands were trembling so bad she could barely hold the wheel. She checked the time. It had been an hour since the gas station. That car had been following her in the dark, lights off for miles, waiting. She drove for another hour, checking her mirrors every 5 seconds. Every shadow looked like a boxy brown car. Every reflection looked like headlights. She was the only person on the road, a sitting duck in the middle of nowhere. Then the song started for the 3rd time. Ren didn't panic this time. She just felt a heavy, sinking feeling in her chest. She knew what was coming. As soon as the tinny choir started singing, the lights hit the mirror. The wagon was right there again. This time it was closer. It felt like metal on metal. The heat from its engine seemed to bleed right through her trunk. It swerved when she swerved. It sped up when she sped up. They were playing with her, cat and mouse. And the mouse was losing. She saw a sign up ahead. A big glowing orange sign for a Love's truck stop. It looked like heaven. Ren didn't think twice. She yanked the wheel hard to the right, cutting across the rumble strips and diving onto the exit ramp. She took the curve way too fast, tires fighting for grip, and shot straight into the brightly lit parking lot. She didn't even park right. She just slammed on the brakes in front of the convenience store, threw the door open, and ran. She nearly tackled a guy in a safety vest by the door. She was out of breath, rambling, pointing back at the highway. She told the cashier and a trucker standing there about the wagon. The music, the lights. They listened. They looked at her wild eyes and they believed her. They walked outside with her, scanning the lot. Empty. There were a few big rigs idling in the back, but no brown station wagon. No headlights, just the cold winter air and the sound of the highway in the distance. Ren waited there for an hour. She drank bad coffee and stared out the window, watching every car that pulled in. She kept expecting to see that brown front-end nose around the corner. She kept waiting for the driver to finally step out so she could see who, or what, had been hunting her. But the car never came back. She drove the rest of the way to her parents' house with her eyes glued to the mirrors. She got there just before the sun came up. She never told her folks about the music. It sounded too crazy to say out loud. But she hasn't forgotten. To this day, Wren can't stand Christmas carols. You hear a holiday tune in a store, you think of family. She thinks of a dark highway and a dead radio playing a song it had no business playing. She still drives that road sometimes. But every time the sun goes down, she checks the radio. She pushes the power button again and again, just to make sure it works. Because deep down, she knows she was one of the lucky ones. See, that driver wasn't a ghost. He was flesh and blood, and the facts are ugly. Women between 18 and 24 get stalked more than any other age group in America. Over half of them are targeted before they turn 25. Wren was 20. She found an exit ramp. But next time you see headlights in your mirror, ask yourself if you're going to be that lucky. Forrest stood over the bathtub, hands moving in a blur under the scalding water. There was no bleach. There was only a bar of cheap hand soap and a desperate need for silence. He scrubbed furiously at the soiled fabric, steam rising to dampen his forehead, ears straining for any sound from the bedroom. His girlfriend was asleep just a few yards away, and the only thing worse than the accident itself would be the humiliation of waking her to explain it. He wrung out the wet underwear, knuckles raw from the heat, and dropped them in a heap on the tub's edge. He stared at them, a gross, unfinished problem he didn't have time to solve. In that quiet, humid moment, standing half-naked in the dim light, he felt a sinking certainty. It wasn't just embarrassment. He knew, with absolute clarity, that the universe had already decided how today was going to go. He wiped himself down, threw his clothes on over damp skin, and slipped out. He felt unclean. He felt rushed. He stepped into the freezing winter air, rushing to the driveway to calculate his route. But he stopped dead. His front tire was flat. The rim was practically touching the concrete. It felt like a deliberate attack. He was an Amazon Flex driver. He had no fleet manager to call, no backup truck to swap into. This aging sedan was his personal property and his only lifeline. He was completely on his own. The cold bit his hands as he wrestled with the spare tire kit. He couldn't afford a new tire, so he used a can of chemical sealant. It hissed into the rubber, a thin, desperate sound in the quiet morning. The flat tire stole 40 minutes he would never get back. He left for his punishing suburban route chilled to the bone, his stomach a tight coil of dread. 2 hours in, the bad luck solidified into a pattern. He was moving too fast, trying to claw back the time the bathroom incident had stolen. He jumped out at a stop, package under his arm, and missed the patch of slick black ice on the walkway. His feet went out. He hit the ground hard, the breath leaving his lungs. The package, marked fragile in red letters, slipped from his grasp and hit the pavement with a sharp, sickening crack. Forrest dragged himself up and chose honesty. He rang the doorbell. The customer, a woman in an expensive coat, stepped out. Forrest offered a tired, sincere apology, explaining the ice and the accident. Her expression didn't soften. A tide of cold malice washed over her face. She raised her voice, the sound shrill in the crisp air, tearing into him with curses about his incompetence and his worth. Forrest stood there, taking it. Then she did the unexpected. She leaned forward and spat directly on his cheek. The warm, thick moisture was a primal violation. She slammed the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Forrest stood there, feeling the cold wetness on his skin. Every attempt to restore normalcy had failed. The world was dismissing him. It was spitting him out. The rest of the day was a frantic grind. Exhaustion pressed down on him like a physical weight. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows. His last stop was in a quiet, affluent cul-de-sac. The late afternoon light faded into a blue-gray dusk. He parked his sedan, blocking a small portion of the narrow street. He climbed out, muscles screaming, just wanting to be done. He grabbed the final package and started toward the house. That was when he heard it. A car pulled up directly behind his sedan. Immediately, the horn began to blast. It wasn't a polite honk. It was a long, continuous scream. Beep! It was an assault of pure sound, raw and impatient. It cut through the quiet neighborhood, vibrating in Forrest's teeth. Forrest stopped. He was finished. The noise, the morning humiliation, the spit, it all culminated here. He set the package on the porch. He was past fear. He was just filled with rage. He turned and walked, slow and deliberate, back toward the driver leaning on the horn. The car door flew open. A tall, heavy man in a dark jacket erupted from the seat, his face a mask of fury. The raging driver screamed at the top of his lungs, yelling obscenities about the road and Forrest's job. Spittle flew from his mouth. Forrest kept walking. He clenched his fists close enough to see the raw, red anger in the driver's eyes. He prepared to yell back. But as Forrest closed the final distance, the raging driver did the most chilling, unexpected thing. He simply stopped yelling. The silence was sudden and terrifying. The man broke eye contact. He turned his back on Forrest. With a terrifying, unnerving calm, he got back into his car. Forrest paused, confused. The shift from hot rage to cold silence threw him off balance. A paralyzing terror took hold. The driver didn't look at him. He didn't offer a final curse. He just slammed the door. Then he gunned the engine. The tires squealed on the cold asphalt. Forrest stood paralyzed as the driver wrenched the wheel. The massive vehicle turned away from the road and pointed directly at him. The engine screamed, a horrifying mechanical shriek. Forrest's instinct screamed at him to move. He tried to lunge for the curb, to throw himself out of the path of the metal beast. But the winter had one final trap. His boot hit a patch of invisible black ice. His legs scrambled uselessly, finding no traction. He was grounded, held in place by the cold. Then the collision. The bumper struck him with the force of a wrecking ball. He heard the structure of his hips disintegrate instantly, a sickening crunch as his pelvis shattered into fragments. The force threw him backward onto the ice, but the car didn't stop. The front tire rolled over his chest, and he heard a wet, popping sound as his lung ruptured, filling his mouth with the hot, coppery taste of blood. Then came the darkness. The heavy rubber crushed the left side of his head against the asphalt, a pressure so immense it didn't even feel like pain, just a deafening, grinding static as the bone gave way. The neighbors saw Forrest's broken form on the pavement. They watched the raging driver reverse, turn the wheel, and with one final squeal of tires, speed away down the dark street. Forrest lived, saved by a neighbor's call, but he was barely recognizable. The damage was catastrophic. A shattered pelvis held together by screws, a collapsed lung that left him gasping, and a skull fracture that changed the shape of his face forever. The driver was never caught. There were no cameras in the cul-de-sac. Forrest was left with nothing but the scars. Lying in the hospital bed during the long, painful nights, his mind kept drifting back to the beginning. He thought about the darkness of his bathroom. He thought about the heat of the water and the frantic, silent scrubbing. He realized now that the sinking feeling in his gut hadn't been shame. It was a warning. The universe had been screaming at him in that quiet room. It tried to stop him with the cramp, with the flat tire, with the ice. The chaos of the morning was never about an accident. It was a desperate plea to keep him home, to keep him safe in the dark. He had ignored every sign. Now, staring at the ceiling, he knows better. The next time the silence feels too heavy, or the dread settles in his stomach before the sun comes up, He won't try to push through. He will listen. Joshua knew he was in trouble the moment the pavement narrowed. It was 1:45 on a pitch-black night in rural Tennessee, and he was a long way from the safety of his spreadsheets and office lights. He was 34 years old, an IT consultant used to solving problems with logic. But logic doesn't work when you miss your exit in the dark and your GPS decides to quit. He was driving a compact sedan, just a regular commuter car, navigating a 2-lane blacktop that felt like it was leading nowhere. Trees choked the road on both sides. Big old oaks and pines leaned over the asphalt, their branches scraping together in the wind. It sounded like whispering, just a constant dry scratching sound against the night sky. 10 minutes in, he finally saw lights. A pair of headlamps appeared in his rearview mirror way back, just twin beams cutting through the gloom. It was a dark blue Ford F-150. Joshua actually let out a breath when he saw it. Seeing another person out here felt like good news. It meant the road went somewhere. For 2 miles, that truck drove exactly how you're supposed to. It stayed back. It kept a respectful distance. Joshua loosened his grip on the wheel a little. He thought he was fine. Then everything changed. They came around a long, sweeping curve, and the truck woke up. The engine roared, a loud, angry mechanical shout that filled up Joshua's little car. He didn't even have time to tap his brakes. Bam! Metal hit plastic. It was a solid, ugly sound. The impact jolted Joshua forward against his seatbelt, snapping his head back. It wasn't enough to spin him out, but it wasn't an accident. You know when someone drifts into you, and you know when someone hits you on purpose. This was a handshake, a greeting. Joshua's heart started hammering against his ribs. He didn't think about insurance or exchanging information. He mashed the gas pedal. His little sedan groaned as he pushed it. The speedometer climbed past 40, then 50, then 60. That road wasn't built for those speeds. The trees turned into a gray blur. But that F-150 didn't fall back. It stayed right on his bumper, a massive shadow that wouldn't let go. The truck's high beams clicked on, flooding Joshua's car with blinding white light. He couldn't see anything in his mirrors except that glare. He heard his own engine whining, high and desperate. He came up on a sharp left curve and braced himself. Crash. The second hit was harder, meaner. The back end of the sedan kicked out to the right. The tires screamed against the asphalt, sliding sideways. Joshua fought the wheel, his hands slipping on the plastic, fighting to keep the car on the road. He knew the physics. A sedan doesn't win a fight with a full-size pickup. He saw a patch of gravel shoulder ahead. He didn't have a plan. He just wanted out of the fight. He figured if he pulled over, the guy would just scream something out the window and keep going. Just road rage, just some angry drunk. He yanked the car onto the shoulder. Dust and rocks kicked up everywhere as he slammed on the brakes. But the truck didn't pass. It pulled over too. It stopped exactly 30 feet behind him. It just sat there. The engine didn't cut off. It sat there idling, a low, heavy sound that shook the ground. It sounded like a big animal waiting to pounce. Joshua watched the rearview mirror. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely keep them on the wheel. The brake lights from his car painted everything behind him in a bloody red glow. Then, the driver's door of the truck opened. It made a long, loud creak. A rusty hinge that hadn't been oiled in 20 years. A figure stepped out. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, dressed in a dark hoodie and dark pants. But it was the face that made Joshua's blood run cold. There was no face. The driver was wearing a mask, not a Halloween mask, not a clown face. It was just a solid, smooth, porcelain white piece of plastic. No eye holes, no mouth slit, no nose, just a blank white nothing. The figure didn't yell. He didn't wave a tire iron. He just stood by the open door of his truck. He faced the back of Joshua's car and did absolutely nothing. 15 seconds passed, then 20. The figure was perfectly still. That was the part that broke Joshua. If the guy had been screaming, that's human. That's anger. But standing there like a statue in the middle of the woods, wearing a face with no eyes, that's not right. That's something else entirely. Joshua didn't check the mirror again. He didn't wait to see what came next. He slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The sedan's tires spun out, throwing gravel backward like buckshot. The car fishtailed onto the pavement and took off. Joshua drove like a maniac. He took corners way too fast, tires squealing, terrified he was going to wrap himself around a tree. The only sound inside the car was his own ragged breathing. It took 10 minutes to find the highway. When he saw the green signs for the interstate, he almost cried. He merged onto I-40 and didn't look back. The drive home was a blur of paranoia. Every set of headlights behind him looked like that truck. He took random exits, drove in loops, checked his mirrors every 3 seconds. He was terrified he was leading it back to his sanctuary. 40 minutes later, he pulled into his driveway. It was a quiet suburban street. Lawns were mowed, porch lights were on. It felt like a different planet. He yanked the parking brake. Panic took over. He didn't think. He snatched his house keys from the ignition, kicked the door open, and bailed. He sprinted across his own lawn at 1:15 in the morning. He fumbled with the deadbolt, jamming the key in, his hands trembling violently. The lock finally clicked. He threw the door open, slammed it shut, and locked every bolt he had. He went straight to the peephole, and there it was. The dark blue F-150 was pulling into his yard. It didn't make a sound. The headlights were off. It just rolled over the curb and onto the grass, a massive black shape blocking out the moonlight. It stopped 10 feet from his front porch. The engine settled into that same low, heavy idle. Joshua stood frozen. He couldn't breathe. He watched through that little glass lens. His safe space was gone. The monster was parked on his lawn. He realized his heart was beating so hard it hurt his chest. It was a slow, heavy pounding in his ears. He backed away from the door. He needed the police. Right now. He reached into his right pocket to grab his phone and dial 911. It was empty. He patted his left pocket. Nothing. He checked his back pockets. Then the image hit him. The center console. In the rush to get out, in that blind panic, he had left the phone sitting right there on the cup holder. It was out in the driveway. Inside the car, sitting right next to the monster, he was helpless, trapped in his own house with no way to call for help. 2 minutes. For 2 whole minutes, that truck just sat there. The guy in the white mask was inside, watching the door, knowing Joshua was right there on the other side, cut off from the world. Then the truck sent a message. It flashed its high beams once. Flash. A silent signal. I see you. I know where you sleep. Then the truck slowly backed up. The tires crushed the grass. It rolled back onto the street, turned, and drove away into the night, quiet as a ghost. Joshua watched that empty street for 30 minutes. He grabbed an old baseball bat from the closet and sat in the dark living room. He couldn't call the cops. He couldn't call anyone. He just had to sit there and wait. He sat there all night. Every time a car drove by outside, he flinched. He knew the truth. The guy didn't need to break in. He had already done the damage. Joshua wasn't safe anymore. The house was dead silent, except for that heavy feeling in his gut that told him this wasn't over. The mask knew where he lived, and that was enough.